Good morning, guys. Well, it's morning where I am. It is morning in Texas. It's about 7:30 in the morning and it's the summertime. So it's the perfect time to take you guys out here before it gets too hot today and show you my herb garden. So before you pop over to Module 1 and get started on the course, now that you've read over the herbal correspondences, I kind of wanted to show you what I'm growing. Now, I do want to warn you that because we are in the hottest part of the summer here in Texas, my herbs aren't doing as great as they were, say, back in April or March in the spring. And if any of you lives in a hot climate, I'm sure you can understand and appreciate that. Another thing I want to preface by saying is my garden is kind of a mess right now. It's a little bit overgrown. It's just been kind of a crazy time. We are in a transition right now, so Texas has two growing seasons, and I talk about this a lot on my YouTube channel, Hill Country Homestead. So Texas has two growing seasons, and what that means is that we can grow things in spring, and we can also grow things in the fall. So right now I'm kind of in the transition in my garden where some of my spring and summer stuff is dying, it's ending its life cycle. So I'm pulling those plants up and amending the soil to get ready for new plants, which I already have as seedlings in like my broccoli, my cauliflower, things like that, things that grow better in the wintertime. So my garden is a little disheveled right now. There's some stuff that doesn't look as great as it should be. It's just having a hard time in the heat, and some of it won't make it through this next month of August, but that'll be okay because it makes room for new stuff. But let's take a look at my herb garden. So this is the herb section of my garden. I actually relocated it. I had it in that back corner over there, but it was getting just way too much sun. It was a great spot for it to be in spring, but as we got hotter, it got bad for it. Oh look, we have a little bumblebee friend. Oh. Okay, so this first plant here is actually not an herb, it is a succulent. It is called a mentholatum plant or a Vicks plant. And if you rub on the leaves and smell them, they smell just like Vicks. I can't wait for the day when technology is so advanced that we can smell through our screens. But until now, you're just gonna have to take my word for it. You just take a little bit of the leaves here and just rub on it, and great mentholatum smell. These grow really well here in Texas because they are a succulent. Next wild thing that we have growing here is my stevia plant. It's the plant that the stevia sweetener is made from. It is organic, and to be honest, this is my first year growing it, so I haven't done a whole lot with it yet. I've just been kind of letting it do its thing, but I think it's time to take some clippings off. I'm going to research how to propagate this and probably try to cut this one off about here and see if I can start a new plant. And you can do the same thing with succulents, like here, all these ends here, let me see, all these long ends, you can cut those off and you can use those to start new plants. So I'm thinking that that's what I'm gonna do with these guys. This right here is anise hyssop. Isn't it so pretty? Look at that. Now, anise hyssop is often confused with hyssop, which I have that too. It's not the same thing. So this plant, anise hyssop, is ruled by the planet Mercury. And so what that means is that it is a great source of communication. So communication is one of the strong properties of this plant. If you wanted to encourage good communication, maybe you and your partner have been fighting a lot, maybe you have some discourse with your boss or coworker, you could implement anise hyssop into a spell to try to mend the communication in that relationship. It's also great for protection. It's also great for healing, relieves anxiety, brings calming. It's all in all a great plant and a wonderful staple. I highly suggest, if you can, to get one. It grows very well in the Texas months, but I think it would grow well in places that aren't quite as warm also. And you can always get the flowers and save seeds. A popular use for anise hyssop is to use it as an incense, and also to use it medicinally for to be made into a tea. That we have another staple in a witch's garden. That's lavender. This is actually the second lavender plant I grew this year. I had another one that didn't make it through some bad hailstorms that we had. So I got this one, and this one is just absolutely thriving. It's putting off a lot of beautiful flowers that I can harvest. Also, the stems themselves are full of fragrance. So don't just think that you can only utilize the flowers. That's just not true. You can utilize the plants themselves. You can utilize the stems. In fact, I like the way that burning the stems smells way better than burning the flowers. I make my own sticks for burning sometimes, cleansing sticks with herbs, and I use the stems of lavender. Lavender was one of the herbs that we talked about on our herbal correspondences sheet that you should have reviewed by now. But this is what it looks like when you grow your own. You can find these at almost any nursery or even like Lowe's or Home Depot. This came from someplace like that because it was my second one that I got. I got it a little bit late in the season. I think I got it about a month and a half ago. And it was a lot smaller than this. They were all on sale because it was getting into off season. So I bought it and it's just done wonderfully. The second layer of this shelf we have here, I have got a couple of plants. I'm gonna pull this guy out so you can see it better. And this is my Thai basil. And this is one of the ones that doesn't do so great in this heat, which is why I've got it on the second shelf to kind of keep it barricaded from the direct sun just a little bit. It's still flowering, so it's still doing okay, but it isn't as well as it was a couple months ago. Now, Thai basil, this specific type of basil, is often what's used whenever you get any kind of Thai food or soups, or even like pho. If you've ever had pho and you see the basil, the big basil that's in there, oftentimes they're using this kind of basil. It has a lot of culinary uses and purposes. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't use it for any of the other magical purposes that come along with basil, because you absolutely can. This is another one that was included on your herbal correspondence sheet. So you should have read up on that by now, and all of the medicinal and magical properties that were listed there. Down here on the bottom, we've got this little guy. This is my oregano, and for the same reason that I moved the Thai basil, that's why he's down there on the bottom. He was up closer to the top of my shelves and he was not doing too hot. And as you can see, he's got a little bit of yellowing of the leaves, but not as bad as it was. He was kind of wilty a few weeks ago. So I relocated all of the herbs, and I kind of moved around where everybody was placed. And that's the great thing about having your plants in containers versus in the ground. You can do that. You can move around to see where they do best. Some like full sun, some like part sun, and some will tell you they like full sun, but once they're in the full sun in Texas, they kind of get wilty and sad. So you have to play with it, and that's one of my favorite things about growing herbs in containers. Now, it does limit the amount of growth and how large they can get, and that's the downside. You can get really large pots if you have the room, and of course get them larger, but if I had all of these in large pots, I probably wouldn't have any room in my garden for anything else. I use this for a lot of things. You can, if you looked on your herbal correspondences page, or oregano was included on there as well. And so I don't have to tell you all the amazing properties it has. Except this is hyssop, and look, I've just spotted a little mark of the fae. Oh, some little mushrooms. Now, mushrooms in your garden or in your containers is, of course, not only indicative of the fae being present, but it also means that you have a lot of organic material in your soil, which is a good thing. That means that good bacteria are growing in here. Now, if you can see, my hyssop is a little bit wilty as well. It definitely has done a lot better now that I've moved it over into this part of the yard. And I'm hoping that within the next month or so, once we kind of start to cool off and start to get into the beginnings of fall, that it will kind of bounce back. It was a lot more lush and a lot more large. As you can see, it's kind of lost a little bit of its branches, but I'm still able to harvest a little bit at a time off of it, and that's typically what I do with my herbs. I don't take a bunch off at once. I just come through and I clip the tops. Herbs actually love when you clip the tops. It stimulates growth. And so a lot of times if you come and you clip off the tops of your herbs, you will come back later to find a bunch of different little branches popping off, because it stimulates that. It stimulates more shoots. And below that, down here, we have bee balm. And I love bee balm. I love the way that it smells. I usually have just in the past foraged my bee balm because it does grow in the wild here. It's a different variation of bee balm than this though. But I found this at my local nursery and I just had to get it. And if you can see down here, there's a lot of new growth coming in. So this guy got kind of wilty. He was up higher, just like the Thai basil. And I'm gonna pull him out so that you can see how he kind of, you see those dead branches and stuff there? He kind of got a little sad. We did have a heat wave, and I've talked about this, of over 103 degrees and even up to 106. And without the heat index, that's hot. But you add the heat index in, bringing it over to over 110 degrees, the plants were very unhappy. So I had to water them a lot more than usual at the right time, just so that they could maintain the moisture that they needed to survive. But as you can see, now that I've moved them and the heat's cooled down a little bit, we've got a lot of new growth popping in. So that's great news. There's lavender that didn't make it. Okay, so this is another basil plant I have. I actually have a total of 4 basil plants. And this is the most common basil that you see when you're purchasing basils in nurseries, or you see seeds that can be purchased, or even the ones that you see in the store. If you just buy the clippings in the store, in the produce section, it's this kind of basil. And it's sweet basil. And it has a lot of great culinary purposes. It's also great for prosperity. It's great for protection, purification. It's on your herbal correspondences list, and we actually will be using basil for this course. So if you already grow basil, then that's awesome, because you will be able to just harvest. And I would go ahead and do that now. Go ahead and harvest some. That way you can dry it out, and it would be sufficiently dry to use for our upcoming projects. Now this is one of 2, I have 2 of this type of basil. This is my one that's in a container, and I'm gonna go ahead and show you the one that's in the ground too. See, this is sweet basil also, and this one's in the ground, and you can see how much larger it is than the other one. Now, the reason that I have it in the ground is, and they don't look too good right now because they are really sad from the heat, but they will bounce back. Those are my tomatoes. And then I also have garlic in there too. It's kind of hard to see, it's hidden, but garlic and basil companion planted with your tomatoes will help deter pests. And I have another kind. This is my 4th kind, or my 4th basil plant, the 3rd variety, and that's this one right here. And it's so pretty. Now, normally it's a lot darker in color. This is purple basil, but so usually it looks like closer to that. But all of the sun has kind of like depleted the purple hue, the purple pigment from the leaves, which is kind of wild. But yeah, this one is taken off, and you can see again how much bigger they get when you plant them in the ground versus planting them in a container. But the downside is I can't move these. So if these guys started to get too much sun where they were at right here and started to get wilty, I would just kind of have to let it happen, unfortunately. All right, friends, another staple in a witch's apothecary. Good old rosemary. Now, I have this one in a container, and this is one variety, and then I have another variety in my front yard that I planted in my flower beds at the very end, and it is the sprawling rosemary, and which grows indigenously here in Texas. And the reason I put it in that spot is because that spot gets a lot of sun, and I wanted something that was heat resistant. And I'm gonna be honest with you, even that rosemary bush struggles there. It does okay in other parts of the year. Even in winter, they're very hardy. They can go without water. They are like the cockroaches of herbs, honestly, because they can survive almost through any kind of temperatures. However, that intense sun and that intense Texas heat takes a whole toll on it. So this one does not do well in the ground. This variety specifically is not one that's indigenous to Texas, so I keep it in a container so that I can move it around. And this one was also, of course, included on your herbal correspondences. And this one, so you can kind of see where I have gone, and I've taken clippings off, and you can see where it has stimulated more growth. You can really see it back here. See how that it's kind of getting fuller coming up there? Those are spots where I trimmed off clippings to dry out to harvest to use. And so that's what I'm talking about when I say that by trimming the tops, you will stimulate new growth. And right here, we have another wonderful, fabulous herb to add to your collection. As you can see, I have been harvesting some of that one as well. And this is rue. I use rue all the time. I actually have a bunch of dried rue seeds that I use sometimes to dress my candles with. We'll get into that a little bit later next week. But yeah, So rue, fabulous. Add it to your list if you can. Definitely a must-have. And see, this guy down here has got a lot of new growth too. So that's great news. Down here, I have my sweet, sweet mint plant. This guy struggled a little bit too, so I had to relocate it. And now it's doing so much better in this new spot, and it's actually putting off all these trendles. So I'll come through here and I'll just cut off these little trendles. And if you, mint's funny, it kind of grows like, it kind of grows in vines inside the container, so you'll find that when you like pull it out, it's like a lot longer than you originally thought it was. So I'll go through and I'll harvest those off and stimulate some more growth there. This is thyme, and it's a very specific variation of thyme. It's actually lemon thyme. So typically I grow something like German thyme that's a little bit more, you know, traditional smelling. But this lemon thyme, as the name would indicate, has a lemon scent to it. So it does have the properties of thyme, but it also takes on the properties of lemon. So if you look through your herbal correspondences and you saw that anything with lemon in it, lemongrass, lemon balm, those all have kind of the same ability to cleanse and clear away. That's why they're so commonly used in cut and clear baths, which we talk about in week 3. You could actually use these in there too, because it has the lemon smell. And that's not the only plant that I have like that here. I also have another eucalyptus plant that has a lemon smell to it. That's this guy right here. And this guy's doing a little bit better than it was. Again, everything is kind of bouncing back from that really awful heat surge that we had. There you go, you can see there, lemon eucalyptus. So this has all of the properties of eucalyptus, but also takes on those properties of lemon scented herbs. And here we have another staple, which is apothecary, good old common sage, not to be confused with white sage. As many of you know, if you see on social media, it's all over Witch Talk, it's all over Instagram, how problematic white sage is within the witch and spiritual communities, because it is a spiritual practice that was appropriated from Native Americans, and so that, as well as Palo Santo, are considered to be very problematic, not to mention that they're basically raping the earth to obtain sage and Palo Santo. But this is common sage, so it's not the same sage. You don't have to refrain from using all sages. It's just important that you refrain from using white sage. Common sage you're going to use all the time. It is, like I said, a staple in a witch's apothecary. Next up, we have dill. Now this can be used for magical purposes, but I mostly use it for culinary purposes. I really enjoy making pickles, and so I just come out here when I'm going to make a batch of pickles and I just snip, cut some off and take it inside to make my delicious dill pickles with. But it has a lot of other purposes, can still be used for magic. In fact, magically, this plant is pretty diverse. It can be used for protection, it can be used to bring success, it can be used to repel the evil eye, banish negativity, it can be used to bring in prosperity. The possibilities really are endless. It's a very diverse plant. One of the last herbs that I want to show you guys from my herb garden is my citronella, and I actually have another potted citronella. I harvest this throughout the year, I dry it out, and I use it for all kinds of things. It has magical properties, which are listed on your herbal correspondences sheet, as well as medicinal properties, and my favorite usage for citronella is to use it as an all-natural insect repellent, which we will get to when we get to our module on salves. If you have access to citronella, I would go ahead and start drying some out now. And here's my other citronella plant. This one's not quite as big and bushy as the other one, but still pretty good size. Alright guys, that was a sneak peek into my little herb garden. Usually I do have a few more plants. Some of those herbs are no longer in their life cycle. So some herbs, once they flower and go to seed, as it's called, they're done for. And so it's good to learn which herbs do that and which herbs don't. That way you don't end the life cycle of your herbs. So I have a comfrey plant that I have had for years, and I've never let it flower. And if you follow me on Instagram, I talked about a few months back that I was going to go ahead and do something I never do with my herbs, which is let them flower. Typically, I always cut them off before they flower. Herbs are more potent if harvested before they flower. And now I know that a lot of them can go to seed and not recover from that. So I think my comfrey will return next year, but it's done for this year. And usually I can continue having comfrey leaves to harvest for salves and stuff all year long. I mean, I bring that plant inside during the winter time and it looks a little scraggly, but it does still put off leaves that I can harvest. And now it's just a scroungy, gross, dilapidated mess because it's ended its life cycle. That being said, it did flower, so seeds dropped into the pot. So what that means is that a new plant will spring forth. And that is one of the upsides. In the past, there was a basil plant that I had in containers that I totally kind of forgot about. Is towards the end of the year and stopped trimming it, and it went to flower. When it went to flower, the seeds dropped into the pot itself. So later on, when that plant died during the winter, basil always dies. My mother has the same issue. We've both never been able to get a basil plant to make it completely through a year. Bring it inside during the winter, all of that stuff still dies. So I just usually know that every year I'm going to get a new basil plant. Well, this year and specifically, since I forgot about those flowers, it reseeded on itself, the seeds dropped into the pot, and then come spring, I was about to go buy a basil plant and I noticed I had little basil shoots popping up. So that is one upside to allowing your herbs to flower, is that you can save seeds or it will reseed on its own. Two other plants that I have that are similar to that are cilantro. Cilantro is super temperamental to grow, and once it goes to seed, it is done for the year. But if you plant it in the ground, which is what my husband and I plan to do next year, it'll continue its life cycle because it'll continue to reseed in the ground, and it kind of takes over a little bit. We've only tried it in containers and been fairly successful, but once it flowers, it is done. So you kind of want to harvest it in that window and know that, and they're kind of limited at how much you can get unless you have more plants. Another one that's like that is chamomile. And this is my first year actually growing chamomile. Typically I just purchase food grade chamomile, which is what I'm using for a lot of the creations that we're going to be making in this course, and I'll show it to you, you'll see it. And so this year I decided to grow my own, and it looked great, it looked beautiful, it flowered, but did the same thing. And I think it was a mixture between it going to seed and also the intense summer heat. I don't think that it was able to maintain through that. So that one I'm not going to show you because it's basically dead now. But those are my remaining herbs. Those are the ones that are still going strong, and I'm hoping to be able to keep most of them throughout the year inside. One thing that I want to invest in for myself in the future, because I do have so many plants and I do grow seedlings so much, is a garden or a greenhouse. I have a garden, I have a huge garden. I want to invest in a greenhouse so that I can keep my plants somewhere safe during the winters. We don't have super harsh winters here in Texas, but we do have freezes, and we do have freezes often enough to kill all the plants. So that has been a tour of my herb garden, and now you are ready to move on to Module 1 of this course. Thank you for joining me, and have a great day, and be blessed, Witchy Boos.